Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a first look at the Goliath, which will be the tier 10 Royal Navy heavy cruiser, following on of course from the last video which was of the Hawkins. So we've got the start of the line and now the end of the line. Now the good news is that this is in a rather better state than the Hawkins is, but nonetheless I think it still needs a few tweaks. And to put it in very simple terms, at the moment it either basically needs a bit more DPM for its present level of survivability, or it needs a better kind of extended rate of survivability in order to use its DPM that it has currently, if more effectively over the course of a game. Now I will expand on that a bit further, but that is essentially how I see it, and a couple of the other CCs have I think also mooted the idea of it having a better rate of fire, because at the moment it's not amazing. It's definitely far from amazing, but it does have rather big guns, so it perhaps makes sense that it wouldn't be that amazing. They're 9.2 inch guns, they're fairly hefty. They're not uniquely big at tier 10 anymore, of course, not by any means, but what is it, 230 something millimeters? I can't remember the exact thing in metric, but yeah, they're still reasonably big. So Goliath at the moment is basically a long-range HE firing cruiser with a heel, which doesn't really make it that unique at tier 10, to be honest. The gimmick of the line overall seems to be both that they have a heel, reasonable concealment, not as good as the light cruisers, and also short-ranged but long duration hydro. So there's no particularly strong gimmick going on, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'd quite like this line of cruisers, especially after the Italian ones having been introduced, just to be a solid line of heavy cruisers. And if the Hawkins and the Goliath are anything to go by, then they won't be doing anything spectacularly different. As I noted with the Hawkins though, and this kind of ties into what I was saying about survivability particularly, you don't get the energy retention as far as I can see, and you also don't get the extra damage that you can heal back with the light cruisers. You don't get to heal back extra heavy and citadel damage compared to other ships. So the Goliath in particular has got a super heal. It can in theory heal back quite a lot of hit points, but as you start taking heavy damage, of course the amount you can heal back is going to drop rather dramatically. So again, as with the Hawkins, despite having a heal, it feels rather less effective than it might be. So one of the ways in which of course they could therefore make that heal more useful, which would extend your lifespan, is to bump it more towards the kind of heal ability that the light cruisers get. Even an extra charge of the heal, you know, would be something, although not that useful in the scheme of things. In terms of actual armour, it's in a pretty good place. I think my record, I couldn't think of the word there for a second for some reason, my record in terms of potential damage was just over 2 million. I think I've seen other CCs with a fair bit more than that from what they've been talking about in the Warships Discord channel. So yeah, in terms of its tanking ability, it can do quite well for itself as long as you're not doing the silly thing of sitting broadside. But just because you don't really have amazing DPM, far from it, and because you're so reliant on the HE shells as well, even though you might have survived tanking, you know, 2 million potential damage, you probably, chances are at the moment, won't have done better than like 100, 150k in a good game. In fact, this game is the very first game I played in the Goliath, and it's going to be just shy of 150k. And I've matched that, I think, with one other game, but I've had a whole other bunch where it was around 100k. And considering that I wasn't, like, for a couple I tried to be a bit more aggressive, and it really didn't do well with that. Considering that I've been, for the most part, playing it in a fairly unadventurous, you know, staying at range, firing HE at things style, and considering that I've been setting a reasonable number of fires when I play this, the overall damage output seems kind of low compared to other tier 10 cruisers that do the same thing. And unlike the Hawkins at tier 5, having the heal is that much less special. Even having the super heal, it isn't what you think it would be. So this is where I'm coming into saying it needs either a bump to survivability, or it needs a bump to its DPM, or maybe a little of both. So it's not quite there yet. Now, some of the CCs have said they just don't find it an interesting ship to play, and I think that's fair enough. Some people are not going to enjoy what the Goliath has going for it. I mean, as I say, it doesn't really have a gimmick. There's not really anything amazingly unique about it. It's just a decent tier 10 heavy cruiser that could use a little bit of love to make it competitive. In terms of its looks and everything else, well, it does have that rather distinctive, should we call it a Queen Anne's mansion, because that's what the nickname for the Nelson class's superstructure is. Considering how comparatively beefy this thing is, it really does have a fairly decent concealment. I think it's like 11 kilometers you can get it down to, so it's not amazingly stealthy. It's not good enough to stealth drop torpedoes, but it's still pretty decent. I guess I can talk a bit more about this specific game now. In terms of the ship itself, you know, I think I've said all that needs to be said. It's just not an exciting ship necessarily. So as you can see, we have one cap at this point. We've been forced away from C. We don't really have a lot of presence around B, and it's just overall not looking very good, although we have at least given as good as we've gotten in terms of the kills. And as this was my first game as well, you know, I was still feeling my way around this ship, so I've been trying to keep an angle towards everyone. I wasn't exactly how sure how well the armour would hold up. And well, as we can see, it's doing all right so far. I'm already reaching nearly 1 million potential. But I was also not particularly wanting to, you know, just test my luck in terms of giving broadsides to people. So yeah, I'm taking a little bit of a chance here, and in something like a Minotaur, well, you wouldn't necessarily be firing in the open like this in a Minotaur, but I'd have made this this turn with a little bit more confidence, shall we say. But overall, you know, it's just a lot less squashy than the Minotaur, so it does have that going for it. And the Hawkins, in a way, is less squashy than the Emerald, but it depends exactly where you shoot it. So I caught a Yue Yang torp on the belt, which counts as heavy damage, but I'm getting to heal back a substantial chunk of that from the super heal. We're 400 points down though. This is not looking good, and we really need to pick up the pace a bit. But fortunately, well, we kind of have, in that we've killed a bunch of ships in relatively close proximity, so we've narrowed the points gap, but we do still need to take control of this middle cap particularly. So there's that Zhao. I don't really want to get into a one-on-one fight with the Zhao. I've had a couple of matches where it came down to a one-on-one fight with another tier 10 cruiser, and it just cannot win. You really need to be, at the moment in this test version, relying on other people to help you out. You just don't have the DPM versus other cruisers. In terms of setting fires on battleships, it's fine. in terms of trying to out-damage anything else, other cruisers, or even trying to take down, say, a destroyer that's rushing you, you just don't have the rate of fire. You don't necessarily have a huge broadside either. I mean, it's 12 guns. It's pretty good. This is one of the reasons why it does feel like it's pretty good for every individual, you know, for any given salvo you fire at a battleship with HE. It does feel like you've got a good chance of actually setting fires with it. But in terms of the damage output overall, it is quite noticeable that it doesn't really keep pace with the other tier 10 cruisers. I don't know, I mean, having said that, I don't know how it stacks up against Venezia with its... Is it like a 20-second reload? I think, I mean, it was while it was testing. I think it's kept that. But Venezia also has more shells it can throw out. Although, of course, it doesn't have the opportunity to set fires as Goliath does. But comparing it to the Hindenburg, comparing it to the Zhao, comparing it to the Henri, especially, I've not really mentioned this so far, but or maybe I have, I can't remember. The AP shells aren't really that good on this. This is principally an HE firing ship. I think it's because Little White Mouse did post something on the Discord. I think it's the actual shell weight. They're relatively lightweight shells despite the caliber.
The enemy is about to win.
So the only time I've ever really found any use for AP was at comparatively close ranges. Whereas in other tier 10 heavy cruisers, you know, you get a broadside battleship at 12, 13, 14 kilometers. It might well be worth throwing some AP at them. But in this, it would have to be under 10 kilometers, and I would probably stick to trying it against broadside cruisers. There really doesn't seem that much point to using it against battleships overall. They've only got 3 ships left at this point. I am starting to cap. Ping the Hydro again, just in case the Yoyang decides to try and surprise me with torpedoes, but given that I can now comfortably point my nose more or less in the direction that they are going to be coming from, if they are coming, then with the Hydro I should have enough reaction time. We also have enough time on the clock to make this easily doable. And although I could still be firing at this point with a good enough range, you have to take the range module to get the good enough range, but that's definitely not unique for a tier 10 cruiser. I wanted to ensure I wouldn't get reset, although I think they're all focusing on that Yoshino at the moment anyway. But yeah, I didn't want to take the chance, and because I didn't want to take the chance, I probably missed out on getting a last bit of extra damage in this particular match. As it is, all that's left is the Lion. And, well, they've extinguished that fire immediately, so I was robbed of a last bit of ticking damage and maybe even getting the kill via ticking damage, but I can still maybe get some hits in, although I would need better dispersion than that, for sure. So, we're just about done. This was not that close of a game. I mean, it got to being a bit worrisome in terms of points, but I think we can say the enemy team started to, well, either, you know, they suffered from bad positioning or a fatal case of overconfidence, but as it was, you know, we were able to turn that around, and I ended up top of the team somehow. Not entirely sure how. I'm sure damaging and killing that Yue Yang certainly helped, but yeah. So that's the Goliath at the moment. Not the most exciting ship, but it feels pretty solid, and I think it feels like it's about 95% ready. It just needs that little kick in the pants to make it a competitive tier 10 cruiser. Because you stack this up against a Des Moines, or really most of the other tier 10 heavies, and it doesn't really, you know, it doesn't stand out as a long-range fire setter. It doesn't have the AP, and even its survivability is hampered by the fact that it can't heal back the heavy damage as the light cruisers can. So yeah, it might be slightly struggling for an identity, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad ship. It just, you know, doesn't massively stand out in any way. So that's it for this replay. Hopefully you found it interesting, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.